Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Apologies for being a tad late. I got a new laptop the other day, and as you probably know, generally you need a good solid couple hours to get in there and figure out all the technical issues, and I have just not had that time available. So I'm here. Apologies. Civility Partners is a community, or can't even talk about my company. Civility Partners is a consulting firm focused on building positive, thriving work environments. We tend to specialize in turning around toxic work environments and toxic behavior. I'm the founder and CEO. We've been around for 15 years. Over the course of those years, I have had the pleasure of writing 3 books and being cited in a lot of really cool places along the way. Just to clarify a little more on what Civility Partners does, we focus on workforce surveys and we help organizations understand exactly what their workforce needs. We look at internal communication processes, psychological safety, relationships, and more in order to understand a clear picture of the culture. Then we work with organizations to create change using that data. So we'll facilitate some planning meetings to understand the data and figure out what we should do with it and come up with a great change plan and then help clients implement many of the projects on that plan. Certainly, we do a lot of training and development programs. And of course, I specialize and have some other coaches on my team who specialize in turning around negative behavior from leaders. So we do executive coaching specifically for those accused of some not so great behavior. Our clients run the gamut from Stanford and other higher ed, UC Berkeley, to governments such as California's EDD, the FBI, NASA, and all sorts of other industries. So we've had the pleasure of really getting to impact a lot of people around the world. And as I mentioned, I've had the distinct pleasure of being cited in a lot of really cool places. I've done a TEDx talk. So it's been a great ride. So I'd love to hear from anybody who is here paying attention and watching this webinar here today. What does your organization do to celebrate Pride Month? I'm curious what types of things people are doing out there. I know some organizations may donate to the local Pride Parade. Some organizations may actually be at the Pride Parade as a vendor or there to support. Some organizations may do some lunch and learns around, LGBTQIA plus initiatives or learnings. So I'd love to hear, as you're watching this, definitely put some answers in the chat. Let's get some conversation going. Now, one thing that we see a lot with DEI initiatives is that they do tend to be fairly high level. It's Pride Month. You have maybe a lunch and learn about the experiences of LGBTQ, in the workplace so that people can understand a little bit more about that. Or you might do a training around implicit bias. And that's great. You should do those things. But what we find is a lot of organizations sort of stop there and it becomes very high level information. It's sort of just on the surface. And I'm here to encourage you to do more than that as an organization. Everybody has the right and ability and, human right to be in a workplace where they feel like they're included, where they feel valued, where they feel important, where they can gain self-esteem. We can't have a civil and safe society if we have people who don't feel safe and can't be their whole selves at work. We have to have self-esteem in order to function as a human. And I believe that employers tend to sort of ignore that requirement and that need. So just to give you some facts, 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus Americans say that discrimination has played a role in their career development. 50% of LGBTQ plus Americans have experienced workplace discrimination or harassment in their workplace in the last year. And some additional facts from UCLA School of Law, 57% of respondents, LGBTQ plus respondents, said the unfair treatment was motivated by religious beliefs. So now we've got people who are religious, who I'm assuming would like for other people to be okay and inclusive with their religion. but are pushing their beliefs on others. 36% of people of color, LGBTQ plus group, have experienced verbal harassment. 26% of white LGBTQ plus have experienced the same. And I find this number to be really shocking. 50% of the LGBTQ plus community, according to this survey, has not come out to their own supervisor. I think that's pretty appalling if you consider that half of this community leaves a huge portion of themselves out of the workplace. And consider how often we talk about a date that we've gone on if we're single, or where you and your partner have gone. Me and my husband went somewhere this weekend, or my partner took me there this weekend, or we're going on vacation, or for the holidays we went to my partner, my husband or spouse or wife's holiday party with their family. So there's a lot of conversation, if you think about it, that really is focused on our relationships and what we're doing outside of work in terms of having a partner or dating or what have you. So for half of this community to feel like they can't bring that component of themselves to work, I think is pretty appalling and something that we need to change. Just to give you some ideas on some of the types of experiences that just, to take those numbers and turn them into something that may resonate with you. In 2020, a former Amazon employee, Sean Simmons, filed a lawsuit against Amazon alleging discrimination and harassment after telling his boss he was pregnant. Sean is a transgender man. He was repeatedly misgendered, denied appropriate restroom access, and subjected to derogatory comments by coworkers, and was denied a promotion. Despite raising concerns, Sean felt his complaints were ignored and he resigned. So how would you feel if your employer denied the fact that you were pregnant? Amy had been working as a funeral director and embalmer. She'd been working there for 6 years. She wrote a letter to her boss explaining that she was transgender and she wanted to start coming to work as her true self. The funeral home had a dress code. Male funeral directors have to wear pantsuits and women to wear skirts. The company also worried that Amy's transition would distract customers, and so she was fired. So these are just a couple examples of the types of stories that are, all throughout our organization or our society. The bottom line is that every employee has the right to be in a safe environment, and every employee has the right to feel that they're psychologically safe at work so that they can be their true selves. We can't allow things like bias and microaggressions in the workplace. They're part of the way we process as humans, but that means that we have to be hyper aware of them and focus on addressing that behavior in the workplace. I think it's everyone's responsibility to create an environment where people can thrive. And again, I think employers really tend to ignore that the people who work for them, the people who make things go, that employers have a responsibility to those people to make sure that those people don't leave the workplace damaged, that those people leave the workplace feeling better than, that it's just an important component of being an employer that we don't talk about it enough. And if you think about kind of the ROI on this, or why this all makes sense, and just sort of bringing these comments home, according to Maslow, this is obviously an infamous model, that as humans, we have physiological needs such as drinking water and eating and sleeping and breathing. And we have safety and security needs, which in our society means the ability to pay our rent, drive a reliable car, have a safe mode of transportation, that, we live in a safe place. And from there, once those real basic human needs are met, then we start focusing on love and belonging. And so once we feel physically safe, then we can start focusing on our psychological safety, essentially. And so according to Maslow, we cannot have good self-esteem, healthy self-esteem, unless we feel like we belong. And, we're not saying everybody at work has to be best friends, but that people do have to feel like they belong in their workplace in order for them to have self-esteem. Why do employers care about employee self-esteem? Because people cannot be their best selves unless they have healthy self-esteem. So you want people to be the most innovative they possibly can be, the most productive they can possibly be, the most efficient and effective they can possibly be. They need to have self-esteem so that they can self-actualize, and they can't have that healthy self-esteem unless they feel like they belong. So I also notice a lot of times when we're talking about things like allyship, we're often really talking about people. We're talking about implicit bias training. We're talking about having conversations about race at work. We're talking about, getting people together to get to know each other. All of that is important. I'm not discounting that. But that's where I see a lot of employers stop. Same for well-being initiatives, that as employers, we're like, here's your membership to the gym. We have an EAP. We're giving a lot of individual resources to the individuals to help with burnout and help with stress and work-life balance. So employers do that a lot. What employers really need to be doing is starting with themselves. So the organization has to think about its own role in allyship beyond facilitating the ability for the individuals who work there to be allies. What is the organization doing itself? What can departments and teams do? And then what can the individuals do? So I'm going to take you through these three areas. So one thing that is not talked about enough is there's tons and tons and tons and tons of research on what happens in organizations that facilitates the ability for toxic behavior to occur. In other words, risk factors. So just like a safety manager in a manufacturing plant has to look at the risk factors, right? They have to look at, people can only work 8 hours and then they have to come off the manufacturing line because once they get too tired, there's a risk there for their physical safety. Or, I can see that this gear is getting rusty. We have to address that because there's a risk factor against physical safety if that gear remains rusty. That's what safety managers are doing in the workplace. As HR, we have to be looking at the other types of things that maybe aren't so clear and obvious and overt. So for example, a lack of diversity, of course, is going to facilitate the opportunity for toxic behavior to occur because you have 1 or 2 or 3 people who don't belong because they're grossly underrepresented. And so the group that is overrepresented is more likely to discriminate or harass the underrepresented group. Bureaucracy is another example where if an organization has a lot of rules and regulations, the organization is facilitating the ability for bad behavior to occur because it's a lot easier for me to discriminate against you or harass you if we work in a multi-billion-dollar company and the way for you to address it is to go talk to some HR person who you don't even know. And that, that's not inspiring for people to do that. Also, I can use the tools of the organization to harass or bully or mistreat you or discriminate against you. For example, maybe the performance management system in a bureaucratic organization, it's very rigid and difficult. And so that rigidity, those rules, those compliance areas with bureaucratic organizations, sort of eliminate the human factor of stuff where people have become so systematized that there's no room for the human stuff, and that facilitates the opportunity for toxic behavior to occur. Of course, things like lack of training, or if you have a lot of employees who've worked together for a long time, they are more likely to be tighter knit and therefore exclusive and not allowing underrepresented groups to join. It's kind of like, we've been working together all this time. Who are you to come in here and try to be our friend? So if organizations are going to be allies for the LGBTQIA+ community, they have to start with looking at themselves. Where are we facilitating the opportunity for bad behavior to occur? And let's reduce those opportunities for bad behavior to occur. Let's look at those risk factors. So, side note, our philosophy at Civility Partners is focused on individual behavior, organizational behavior, and leadership. That's how your culture exists. So in terms of individual behavior, it's, at all levels, not just the leaders, it's every single person plays a role in the culture. So organizations have to provide resources like training and coaching. Again, this is also an organizational problem, not an individual problem. So the way the organization itself behaves matters. Do we have tolerance for bad behavior? Do we promote people who are bullies and harassing? Do we, ignore complaints about bad behavior? What are our processes and systems that facilitate the opportunity for that individual behavior that we want to occur? And then, of course, leadership plays a role in culture, but I really don't believe in that sentence that culture comes from the top. Culture comes from the people around you. So I might be the president and CEO of, Qualcomm, giant multi-million-dollar tech giant, and I might say the culture here is inclusive. But if somebody at the reception desk making minimum wage feels like the people around him or her are not treating them well, then that's how they see the culture. Whatever I say at the top is totally irrelevant. So again, we really have to focus on teams and departments. So look at your risk factors and look at the places your organization can make change to address those. In terms of department and team allyship, another great question, and this is a great question to ask your teams. What does inclusivity mean to you? What does that word mean to you as an individual? So throw this out at a team meeting and ask people to maybe brainstorm all of the words. I love to do this if you're on Zoom, put people in breakouts and have the groups talk about this word, inclusivity. What does that word mean? Another great question is, what does the opposite of inclusivity look like? So what does it look like to be inclusive? What does that behavior include? And what does it look like to not be inclusive, to be exclusive? So for example, if I'm doing this exercise with my team, we might come up with phrases like inclusive means that I feel heard, listened to, my opinions matter, that I can tell stories about my personal life and not be judged, that I can have crazy ideas and I know you won't pick on me or laugh at me. There won't be repercussions. Mistake. These are all the types of things that inclusivity is, right? What's the opposite of that? Gossiping, making fun of people, picking on someone in front of everybody else, calling out mistakes in public, these behaviors that create an exclusive environment. So it's really great exercise to talk about, what does this word inclusivity mean in general? And then what does the behavior look like that is inclusive, and what does it not look like? And now everyone on your team has a really clear understanding of this. From there, you can take the brainstorming that your team did and apply it to your core values. So, here are some pretty common core values on the screen. And you can audit your processes and procedures against the core values, against the words that came up in the meeting, in the, where you asked, what does inclusivity mean? So for example, and you can do this with all of your HR processes. For example, with onboarding, if one of your core values is quality, then do you do onboarding surveys with new hires to make sure that, in fact, your onboarding is quality? If safety is one of your core values, does your onboarding create psychological safety? How are you ensuring that you're creating psychological safety? In terms of performance management, another HR process you can look at, if one of your core values is accountability, do you measure people for being inclusive? Do you make sure that good behavior is part of what people are measured on? Do managers get measured on their ability to facilitate a positive team environment? So these are the kinds of examples. If you brainstorm your processes and the things that you're doing as a department and team, brainstorm a list of the things and then compare them to your core values and figure out where can we adjust the processes to ensure that we're doing what we say we're going to do. And, against the types of words that people shared in inclusive. One of my favorite pieces of advice is to turn your core values into core competencies so that you're defining the behaviors that align with a word like inclusive, and then defining the behaviors that don't align with the word like inclusive. And then you can turn them into a core competency matrix. And so I'll share this with you if you'd like. But for example, if we're saying inclusiveness demonstrates respect for people, promotes benefits of a diverse workforce, is trusted to and respected by others, works to understand the perspective of others, and promotes opportunities to experience diversity in the workplace, then we could say we can measure people's ability to be inclusive because now we have 5 behavioral, observable facets of being inclusive, and you can measure people against it. Of course, training is super important to individual behavior. So giving people leaders, your managers, the ability to coach people engaging in something like gossip, any sort of exclusive behavior, how to set expectations, how to manage something like incivility, how to proactively create a positive environment. And then, everyone in the organization needs training on being an upstander, stress management, being a leader in your organization, implicit bias, giving and receiving feedback. So making sure that if you're going to say that you're an organization that's inclusive, that you're delivering the right kind of information to facilitate people behaving in these ways. Lastly, let's talk about individual allyship. So this is about creating psychological safety for everyone in your workplace. So this is about, the belief that you can be your true self without any consequences. And one great tip is to find a sentence or a question or something you could say in these moments when you hear something like a microaggression, somebody's interrupted in a staff meeting while they're talking, or people are ignoring the expert in the room because they're a person of color or because they're, from the LGBTQ plus community. So I have this for you as well. Feel free to reach out. I have a list of 16 sort of options, and I would recommend choosing one and going with it. So for example, if I hear a joke at someone's expense, I might say to that individual, hey, I know you don't realize it, but by joking at Jenny's expense, you might offend her. You might offend others. So maybe instead of joking at her expense, you should pull her aside and talk to her about X, the mistake that she made or the thing you need her to do. So that you're leaning into positive intention. And of course, no one's going to say, no, I really meant to embarrass Jenny, So, just finding a way to call people out without, of course, you're not supposed to be shaming everyone either. Your job is to just put a stop to that behavior in the moment. And that's a great way to be an ally. I also like to talk about meetings. Meetings are a great place to observe microaggressions and, poor behavior. So some tips for you is if you're running the meeting, have a very clear agenda. Anybody neurodivergent, if you're, ADHD, for example, having an agenda to follow is going to be super important for you. So giving a clear agenda is helpful in a variety of ways. Making sure you're amplifying ideas and giving credit to people. So for example, when I see people in my networking realm and people say, gosh, you put out such great content on LinkedIn, I say, thank you. That's my marketing team, Jenny and Cleo. And so if we're in a meeting, obviously they're not there in those moments. They don't know that. But if we're in a meeting and someone says, hey, Catherine, your marketing content's great. And Jenny and Cleo are sitting right there. I'm not going to, how horrible is it to say, oh, well, thank you. So giving credit to the right people. Pointing out expertise of others. So sometimes you get someone who's really grandstanding about how great they are and all the wonderful things they've done. And then you could say, hey, Rebecca has a similar experience. Rebecca, what are your thoughts? just as a way to say, hey, there's other people in the room that we need to include. Making sure you're using inclusive language, of course. So you saying, for example, them instead of him or her, or instead of saying, is your husband, free for dinner on Friday night to a coworker? You don't know. Is your partner available? Is your significant other? So using language that's inclusive. Kicking questions to the right person. So making sure that if somebody's asking questions in a meeting to perhaps the head honcho or the white male in the room, that hopefully that white male or anybody else in the room would speak up and say, hey, actually, Chrissy has the answer to that. She's the right person to ask. Chrissy, what's your answer? So that you're just, again, drawing attention to everyone in the room. Making sure the space is accessible is, of course, important. And speaking up against exclusive behavior. And again, being an ally doesn't have to be, hey, you stop it, you're a horrible person. It's just paying attention to what's happening and, speaking up where appropriate. Or after the meeting, if you don't feel comfortable doing something in the room afterward, you could pull that person aside and say, hey, I noticed you interrupted this person a lot. I just wanted to call it out. I'm sure you didn't mean to, but I just wanted to point it out so you're aware next time. Okay, so here's your SHRM activity ID for this webinar. It's half a credit because it was a half an hour. And I wanted to share too, we've got a ton of courses on LinkedIn, and there is a DEIB learning path on LinkedIn Learning. And one of the courses in there is my From Bystander to Upstander course. So definitely recommend that. And shoot me an email if you want the matrix we looked at earlier. The 16 scripts I mentioned. We'll also make sure you have a link to our culture calculator, and that can be a great way to make the business case to a leader in your organization to take action on some of these things we've been talking about. And finally, we have a webinar coming up around managing conflict in the workplace as it relates to political discussions. I know things are starting to get hot and heavy, so we want to make sure you have the tools you need for that. So appreciate you being here with me today, and feel free to reach out with any questions, of course. And thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever they are in the world. All right. Thank you.